Welcome to the Commerce Lab, where every week we sit down with top performing consumer brands and leaders to understand what drives their success. How did they hit their first million, their first 20 million, their first 100 million? What strategies are working for them today that you should be testing, and what's not working that you should be avoiding? This isn't just a podcast, it's the business school for brand operators. Hey crew, welcome back to another episode of the Commerce Lab, and today we are talking about retargeting ads. Why? Because frankly, for most of you, there's a ton of opportunity to optimize and drive higher conversions and sales through retargeting than you're doing right now. You're probably all running retargeting, but you probably haven't optimized it to the point that you should or could, especially with some of the new technology that's out there right now. So I brought on a good friend of mine by the name of Reza Khadjavi, who is the CEO of a technology platform called Shoelace, to help us understand what are some areas of opportunity and ways to optimize and improve your retargeting ads that you probably haven't thought of. So a couple quick examples just to give you a taste of what we talked about. First off, with platforms like Shoelace, you can actually do things like mirror content in your email campaigns that are performing really well as ads. Meaning, let's say you send out an email campaign that has an incredibly high performance, high click rate, drives a ton of revenue. You can actually then automatically mirror that content in a retargeting ad so that you can show that content to folks that didn't actually see the email or didn't open the email. So that's one example. And there's tons of other opportunities to layer in different elements of your e-commerce stack, whether that's reviews, loyalty programs, etc., into your retargeting ads to make them that much more effective. It's something that Reza actually calls customer journey retargeting, and it's an elevated form, an elevated art of running retargeting ads. And it's something that whether or not you end up using Shoelace or not, it doesn't matter. This is something you need to understand because in the environment that we're in right now, where acquisitions costs and the ability to go out and acquire a new customer from a cold audience is becoming more and more expensive, your ability to go out and effectively retarget them and turn them into a customer on the back end is becoming that much more important. So without further ado, I'll leave it to Reza in our discussion to break down how you should be thinking about optimizing your retargeting ads. Hey, Reza, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, man, I'm excited to have you here because I think what you guys are doing is so incredibly in line with what we preach and talk about with a lot of our clients over at Blue Stout. And so I think this is going to be a pretty fun conversation, and we'll try to keep it really actionable for the listeners. But before we get into the details, what I'd like to do is have you just give a quick 30-second intro, tell a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So my name is Reza. I'm the CEO of Shoelace, where we help high-growing direct-to-consumer e-commerce brands create customer journey retargeting campaigns that leverage both kind of high-performing, high return on ad spend results, but also caring a lot about the brand experience and making sure that as customers go through that retargeting journey, they are kind of walking away with a really good, educated experience about the brand. And we think a lot about how actually the mid-funnel and retargeting is a really good place for both sort of leveraging, as everybody knows, really good performance, but then also it's like an overlooked opportunity to create brand experiences that help with things like retention and loyalty and advocacy. And so we have a platform that helps direct-to-consumer brands implement that approach to retargeting.
Right, and we're gonna dig into this, and I've seen firsthand some of the power of Shoelace, and that's why I wanted you guys to come on and talk about this. And we'll dive into some of those nitty-gritty pieces here in a second. But I think at a high level, what I find so compelling about this, I mean, I can find it compelling on a lot of different levels, but at the top level, I think ads in general, right? We work with brands every day, and people are over-reliant on top of the funnel ads. And we've seen that become a big problem over the last year as customer acquisition costs have gone through the roof. Things like Facebook ads acquisition costs have gone through the roof. And so where people could, even a year and a half ago, could heavily rely on a large marketing spend budget and ads to drive sales, that's becoming more and more difficult. And it's starting to shine light on the full customer journey, not just from that initial touch point, driving somebody to a sale and a conversion, but how are you communicating with your customer at every stage of their journey with you? And ad retargeting is something that I think a lot of people, they set it up, but they didn't really focus on optimizing it. And what we're seeing now is a lot more brands looking at that as an area of opportunity. And I think you guys of Shoelace have taken that even a step beyond just, hey, let's actually focus on retargeting, but you've actually created technology that gives you a level of control in how you tell the story about your brand using retargeting ads that's so powerful. And that's what I want to try to kind of explain to everybody today and give them some examples of. Not only should you be focusing on retargeting, but you need to be focusing on what that story is and how you tell it at each stage. And here are some cool ways you could do it with Shoelace.
Yeah, it sounds great. Like, kind of like you said, there's a lot of different places where we can start kind of unpacking a lot of these things. Where do you think is best to kind of start?
So I think the best place to start with this is let's talk a little bit about kind of what you guys see as some of the big, almost like barriers or challenges or things that most retailers are doing wrong right now when they set up retargeting. Because I think that's going to be the best way to sort of resonate and have people go, yes, we're actually doing that right now. So what do you guys see as some of the sort of the biggest, do not do or things that people are doing wrong when they're setting up retargeting?
Yeah, totally. So we've been thinking about this problem for a really long time, probably like a little over 4 years. We've kind of been obsessed about the concept of retargeting for direct-to-consumer e-commerce, and sort of where this started for us. And I'll kind of tell you where the journey of this analysis began for us and how that's evolved for us. So the part that really piqued our interest a while ago is just the degree to which how annoying retargeting has become. So our entire team here sort of started obsessing about that problem, being like, wait a second, what's going on here? Why is it that we're creating these phenomenally annoying experiences where you basically ask any consumer what they feel or what are their thoughts about retargeting? And we've all had these experiences ourselves as consumers as well, where you basically go to a website, you may even buy the product, and then for months and months and months, you start to get plastered with the same ad over and over again. And that's probably an example of the worst extreme. But short of that, most brands are still kind of somewhat annoying, and everyone's sort of on some part of the spectrum of like super annoying to just kind of annoying. And it's almost felt like the entire industry has accepted retargeting as this annoying evil that needs to be part of the marketing mix because it always delivers high return on ad spend. And I think intuitively everybody would prefer that retargeting campaigns not be annoying. But I think the industry has sort of felt this pull that, like I said, it's sort of this trade-off that needs to be made. And so we've spent a lot of time thinking about, well, is that actually the case? Is the trade-off? How have we even gotten here? And so you touched on this a little bit around the rise of CAC and the cost of Facebook ads and just general paid marketing. And so our research sort of took us into that history of this for lack of a better word, like arbitrage opportunity, where maybe in like 2013-ish, 2014, it was sort of the gold rush of Facebook ads where, not everybody knew about this distribution channel. And it was like the golden era where you can just like pour money into Facebook ads and all the math would work out brilliantly for you to scale your e-commerce store and make a ton of money. But, as more and more smart people caught wind of this, more money started pouring into these platforms, and these platforms kind of work based on an auction dynamic. And so this drives the costs up and up and up to a point where the arbitrage opportunity is no longer an arbitrage opportunity. Like correction forces have taken hold, and these the cost of ads are now efficiently priced such that there isn't this massive opportunity to explore anymore. And so what starts to happen? You start to hear a lot of people talk about how retention is the new growth, whereas like once upon a time, people would obsess about scaling acquisition campaigns because that was where the opportunity was. You could actually make a ton of money at scale with those like single transaction purchases. But now as the costs have started to go up, you start to look at the e-commerce funnel, which used to resemble this like upside down kind of triangle where you start with awareness and then you try to funnel people into purchase, and it sort of ends at the bottom layer of that triangle. But the way we've sort of been thinking about the funnel is kind of looking at it as an hourglass, where it just begins at purchase. And so a lot of people have talked about this. We're not the first ones to talk about it, but monetizing the back end, basically having most of the revenue of an e-commerce store try to come from retention, repeat purchase. And so that's starting to be a trend that you start to see industry-wide. Again, it's not something that we are particularly the first ones to see. I think a lot of people are coming to this realization. The part that we've been thinking about is that, okay, if retention is the new growth, and that's starting to become the new important thing to think about, well, how do you get retention? And so there's a lot of ways to think about it from a tactical perspective. What's your email strategy? What's your abandoned cart strategy? And all those like tactics. But at a strategic level, if you think about some of the companies that have the best retention of all time, you think of companies like Apple, for example, who just has like phenomenal retention. And so you ask yourself, what is the biggest driver to retention? In our view, it's brand equity. Obviously you need a phenomenal product that people want to buy from you repeatedly, and you need a business model that has either like replenishable products or a set of product lines that people can actually buy from you repeatedly. But the companies that do retention the best are the ones who have phenomenal brand equity. So you look at like modern examples like away travel. When they start getting into new categories and they've started selling like duffel bags and other things like that, you start to see this like loyal fan base who almost wants to buy the next product that comes out because there's this really strong brand affinity. And so basically, if retention is the new growth and brand equity is the biggest lever to retention, then the question becomes, where does paid marketing fit into this mix? And as customers, as kind of marketers start to realize that because of the cost of paid marketing, we need to start to diversify the way we acquire customers and can't just be reliant on paid traffic. So folks are starting to think about diversifying ways to drive top of funnel traffic. Folks like Webb Smith at 2PM talks a lot about this concept of linear commerce, where brands are actually starting to resemble media companies, where they create these like content operations as a way to drive customers. And that's probably a topic for some other time. But the idea is the trend that you start to see in a world where retention is the new growth and kind of brand first e-commerce is starting to emerge as the new playbook. The question becomes, what do you do with paid marketing? And in this scenario, you're sort of trying to reduce your reliance on top of funnel for paid marketing. And the thing that we've been trying to say is that the mid-funnel and beyond, where it's kind of typically considered as the retargeting afterthought, where you kind of set up a bunch of dynamic product ads and plaster people with the same ads over and over again, that actually represents the biggest opportunity in paid marketing, in our view, where you can use the fact that these audiences are super high intent and that no matter what, they're going to deliver relatively high return on ad spend. And you can get very granular, very nerdy about the types of stories that you want to tell from a brand marketing perspective to kind of educate customers about what your brand narrative is, what you're about, what your story is, et cetera. But then have also a super high obsession with kind of return on ad spend numbers to be able to fund the whole thing. So that's sort of the nutshell of where we think, we can get to like the tactics of how to approach this journey, approach to retargeting. But just kind of tying back to the first thing I said, which is the only way that marketers will end up solving the problem of annoying retargeting, which in our view, it's the time has come to solve that problem, is it has to be motivated by economic incentives. It's not enough for brand marketers on the team to be like, hey, performance folks, like our retargeting is annoying, like shut that off. The performance marketers will come back and like show the ROAS and say like, leave me alone. Like, do you see the money we're making? But there needs to be an economic incentive for why carefully created retargeting journey experiences are the right thing to do from a strategic perspective. And in our view is that time has come because you might have 100,000 visitors come to your site, let's say. And even with the best retargeting, the best funnels and the best abandoned carts and whatnot, you might get like 2%, 3% of that traffic to convert. And then the question we pose is like, what happens if in that scenario of 100,000 visitors, what happens to the 98,000 people who end up leaving without buying? In traditional retargeting, what people do is to try to like plaster that group for as long as possible to squeeze out the last remaining conversions from that cohort of visitors. And our view is that like that's all great, but let's do this in a way that we can try to maximize the last few conversions that are to be had from this like large group of 98,000 people. But let's also be very mindful about the experience that everybody else goes through, because some people in that group might actually really love your product and your brand, and they'll want to buy from you when they get promoted at their job. So why not play an aspirational role in their life and kind of continue to educate them about the brand? Or there might be people who aren't even in your target demographic, but if you tell them your brand story and you feed them the kind of one-liner about what makes your brand special, those folks may end up talking about you at a dinner party or something like that. And so typically what you would refer to as brand marketing, where kind of big companies are able to allocate massive budgets to, quote, brand marketing that is effectively like putting money on fire, right? And even the big companies that do that tolerate it in the capacity that it doesn't necessarily have return on ad spend numbers. And smaller brands, kind of mid-market brands, they obviously can't afford to do this. But our view is you can actually leverage the really high-performing nature of retargeting campaigns to help fund cost-effective brand marketing that doesn't actually lose money. But you could, for example, look at your total retargeting mix and say, I'm going to allocate 25% of my budget towards educating these large groups of customers who aren't necessarily going to buy from me immediately. And because I know there's going to be a few conversions that will trickle through those groups such that I might break even or just make a little bit of money, you start to look at that as a win, because you're able to kind of educate folks so that they will ultimately end up buying from you over and over again. And so maybe I'll stop here. But then there's also this whole notion of how do you take all of the people who are in various stages of the buying journey with your brand, and how do you use retargeting as a way to tell relevant stories and relevant experiences based on where those people are in the funnel, whether that's like they are really close to buying and you want to kind of focus on performance in those capacities and try to maximize return on ad spend as much as possible. But then you have other folks who clearly maybe 30 days have gone by or something like that and they've still not bought, then maybe there's a win in educating those folks about what your brand is about and nurturing them to gradually move through the buying journey with your brand.
Yeah, and there's a lot in that to dissect. So we'll do I think a couple pieces here at a time. What I find so compelling, and this is sort of the example in the way that I explain it to a lot of the clients and people we work with, is that this took a bit of education beforehand around the email space too. People used to just sort of blast their lists, and the idea was, how do we build out the biggest list we possibly can so we can email them offers and make sales on a few percentage points of that massive list. And that's changed dramatically over the years as people understand that there are people in different stages of their journey with you. There are different buying stages, different levels of interest stage. Maybe they've already bought from you. Maybe they're not in a financial position to do so. Maybe they're not aware of the brand enough. They don't have that sort of product desirability at the level that other people on the list have. So you need to be segmenting and sending different messages to different people at different buying stages. And that's exactly what you guys have done with retargeting, is saying, look, retargeting isn't just this blank slate where it's a billboard we need to show in front of everybody as many times as we can to show repetition, knowing that eventually we're going to be able to kind of squeeze out a few percentage points of those people to buy if we repeat that same message again and again enough times. And it's changing it to say, instead, we need to craft a story. And because we've got these incredibly powerful targeting tools with platforms like Facebook, we can pinpoint precisely where people are on their journey with us and show them that correct message that's going to help them and nudge them to take that next step, right? One more step closer. So everything doesn't have to be about instant conversion. It needs to be about pushing somebody to the next stage, right? So, you're talking about sort of building brand affinity. The way that I think of that is, now that's nudging one person from somebody who was curious to now somebody who's very interested. And then taking somebody who's very interested to somebody who's, okay, you know what, actually, I want to check that product out again. And then coming back and eventually buying. Once they buy, you can then use retargeting as a way to further build that affinity with the product and maintain that level of excitement. When somebody buys a product, right, the highest level of excitement they're going to have is immediately after buying, right? And that feeling is going to wane. But if you can use retargeting as a way to continue to tell the brand story after the purchase, it's going to take somebody from just being a happy buyer to turning them into a brand advocate. And that's an incredibly, incredibly powerful thing as you try to scale, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think the comparison to email is spot on in the sense that you used to have the era of spam where people just like plaster people with emails,
Right.
and then now you realize that like there is this table stakes of a personalized experience where a customer is just going to be like fed up, like why is this happening to me? Why do you keep sending me the same email? And I think, consumers are maturing to a point where not everybody understands the technology behind how retargeting works, but people understand what it is. And so I think what is starting to happen is there is this opportunity to stand out and be a sort of forward-thinking brand in an era where most people are just annoying their customers with repeat retargeting. Brands can kind of stand out and create engaging experiences where a customer is going through a retargeting flow, and then they're like, this one feels different. I'm seeing a lot of different content. I'm seeing different things about this brand. And the problem generally tends to be is that this approach that we talk about, this kind of customer journey approach to retargeting, you sort of need a bit of a story to tell. And so if brands find themselves in a situation where really all they have is like a store with a bunch of different products and there isn't this like cohesive narrative around a brand or a story that they're trying to tell, I think you still have a ton of people in e-commerce that are making money in that direction, and kind of all the power to them. But my view is that you, as kind of that starts to become more and more commoditized, and the arbitrage opportunity from a distribution perspective of like throwing money on Facebook ads to get your product in front of people in a cost-effective way, that starts to dwindle. You start to see that only kind of mega players like Amazon, for example, can win at like commoditized product e-commerce. And for everyone else, you kind of need to have a differentiated brand and a story to tell. And so often people ask, how do we create brands? Well, generally that is about storytelling and having a narrative and creating content. And so it's sort of like backing out from, wait. You're talking about like storytelling and retargeting, et cetera. What if we don't have a story to tell? And so if some folks are in that stage, like it's worth thinking about how importantly that should fit into the business model going forward. And so if there is a narrative to tell, if there is a story to tell, if there is content to kind of educate customers about, then retargeting is a phenomenal medium where you can use that to educate the masses of people who interact with your brand who maybe not even left an email. And so the way I think about it is like, let's say there's like 10 different touch points or something from the moment somebody leaves your site. And that doesn't have to be over the next like 3 days. It could be over a month and a half. The best way to think about these is like some combination of, some of these ad experiences based on where people are in the journey, they actually should be very performance driven, where it's like, hey, here's some really cool products you should check out based on what you've seen. We think you'd like these. But then sort of in between them is like, okay, and here's what our brand stands for. And we were featured in like GQ magazine, or here's like what an influencer has to say about us. And kind of sprinkling brand education throughout an otherwise performance-driven retargeting journey is sort of the best framework that I can think about, where you're extracting out the conversions. At the end of the day, the difference between paid marketing and email is that paid marketing costs a lot more money. You have to pay for the ad spend. And so you have to have highly performant campaigns in order to justify the medium. Can't just like marketing managers can't just go to their boss and be like, hey boss, can we spend like 20 grand a day just to educate our customers? And be like, wait a second, like let's take it easy. Like, how are we going to fund this whole thing? But to me, the beauty about retargeting is that there is a lot of conversions to extract because these are generally high intent audiences. And so a lot of people talk about the tension between performance and brand marketing, and these two things have sort of been at odds with each other for a really long time. Our view has been, the middle of the funnel and retargeting journeys can actually play this interesting arbitrator role where it's a medium to tell stories, it's a medium to evangelize the brand and educate and so on, but it's also a medium for really high performant return on ad spend campaigns. And so could the middle of the funnel and could retargeting journeys be the arbitrator that sort of brings these two tensions together? And our theory has been that it most certainly can. And we work with kind of thousands of brands to help them marry these two otherwise opposing forces together to create the best of both worlds.
And what we see, funny enough, on the email side, because one of the things we do is work with clients to help build out, really robust email journeys, is we find a lot of times content, pure content or educational based emails actually convert better than actual offers. So I'd be interesting to see on the customer retargeting side if you guys actually do see in some cases where content converts better than even sales promotions. But I think that's it's absolutely right on when you're looking at customer retargeting, it has to have a positive ROAS, but it makes sense, right? If you think about it logically, the idea of saying, okay, we can send the same ad to the same person 20 times, or we can adjust that ad knowing specifically where that person is in their decision making and target that messaging specifically to push them over the fence. We talk about this during site design all the time, which is, the customers essentially make purchasing decisions in two broad phases. The first is emotional, and then the second is logical. And the first is if they're not emotionally tied, right, and emotionally bought into what you're doing, either the product itself, product desirability, or brand affinity and brand desire, if they're not emotionally, internally desiring what you have to sell, then they're never going to buy. But the second they make that emotional decision, then they start to make logical questions, and that's logical questions like, well, okay, is this actually going to work? What happens if it gets delivered and it doesn't work properly, right? Or it doesn't fit properly? And that's where utilizing things like custom reviews, right, can be incredibly helpful for driving conversions on a site. And same thing for ads, right? If you've got somebody in a position where they're already in love with what you're doing, right? They already love the product and love the concept, but they just have some logical questions that maybe they don't quite have that level of trust with you because they haven't bought from you before. If you can target ads that are specific to answering those questions or breaking down those specific barriers to purchase, that's going to do a much better job of converting that person than them seeing one more ad of just the product, right?
Yeah, totally. And one thing that we've seen is that every time we talk to marketers or brands or other folks about these concepts, like people generally get fired up. A lot of people have at their own team meetings and strategy discussions, like a lot of people come to these sorts of conclusions where it's like, man, we can get a lot more granular with our retargeting. We can get a lot more personalized. We can tell better stories. And there's almost nobody that I've ever met that hasn't had some sort of thought in the past about experimenting with this approach to retargeting. And I think what's happened was that there's never really been a forcing function to make it mission critical. And so it's always fell to the bottom of the priority list where it's like, okay, well, if we need to obsess about like scaling our acquisition campaigns right now because there's a lot more opportunity there and we're going to focus on that or focus on different areas. And so it's always really been a matter of priority setting, and then B, how much work and labor is involved with actually creating this, granular level of retargeting. And it turns out it's a ton of work compared to just firing up a dynamic product ad that'll hit everybody. And so often what you see is that because of where it ranks on the priority list, and because of how cumbersome it is to do these things, this has always kind of fell as a back burner for brands. But what's starting to happen with the rise of CAC, with the importance of retention, with the importance of brand building, it's starting to bubble up as pretty mission critical from a priority perspective, because this is a very important medium to tell your story. This is a very important medium to engage with customers who haven't left an email, who are going to have some impression of your brand if you really annoy them and you just show them the same ads over and over again. And so it's rising up from the perspective of it being mission critical to actually take these things seriously. And then, not to kind of shamelessly plug Shoelace, but their technology is advancing to a point where it's making it easier to set up these kinds of journeys. And so Shoelace is a really good example that helps take out a lot of the grunt work of setting up these campaigns. Anybody who I've met who've sort of told me that I had this idea that you're describing, and I kind of went into Ads Manager and went to kind of set up these granular journeys. And it's just it's a heck of a mission to go and create all these sub-segments and include these audiences and exclude them. And it's just you get discouraged by the time you finish, and it's hard to realize what is actually going on and what are people seeing. And so I think we'll start to see the rise of like products and technology and services that help facilitate this. And so, yeah, I think that's why we're obviously doing what we're doing and very bullish about this approach. And I think before it sort of becomes table stakes for everyone, I think brands can benefit a lot by standing out as opposed to others in their industry in terms of how polished and well done the retargeting is. I think it adds a really important touch point throughout that kind of broader customer journey experience.
You mentioned table stakes. I think it's going to become table stakes a lot faster than people realize, not just because the rise of CAC and sort of the need to focus on the back side of the funnel, sort of the mid to back side of the funnel and mainly around retention, but also just looking at the audience, right? It's a different group of customers that are being raised, right? It's not your parents. It's not even, us, right? Where we might be okay seeing the same ad across a retargeting platform 10 times and it doesn't bother us because that's just how the world works. But for Gen Z and younger and folks that grew up on social media, right, they're not used to that experience. They're used to dynamic content, right? They're used to Instagram. And so brands need to start to meet that new buyer, that new generation of buyer where they are at. And sort of the old way of just peppering people with the same ad it's not going to be as effective. So I think that notion of table stakes is very quickly becoming a reality.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was thinking about this the other day where the first half of millennials and Gen X, like these are folks who grew up on dial-up internet, right? Like when yep. I remember when we were just kind of getting on the internet, people couldn't use like the phone line at home, and like I feel like that generation is just so grateful about this gift of the internet. But you start to look at generations that are born through high-speed mobile internet. There's just like a higher level of expectation from an experience perspective that they're not willing to tolerate. And so my view is for sure that brands will only solve this problem if there's an economic incentive to do so. Otherwise, it will never make it to the top of the priority list. And so, one thing that I've always seen is that there are folks at companies, whether they're kind of the brand manager or kind of marketing manager, e-commerce manager, who are very much excited about these ideas, but they find it hard to kind of win over the rest of the company and make a case to say that we should take these things seriously. But I think those things are starting to get easier and easier to do as the entire companies. I think the brands who, in my opinion, are well set up to win in 2020 and beyond are the ones who take retention extremely seriously, are the ones who take building brand equity really seriously. And in companies where that's the foundational element of their strategy, something like this just becomes natural. It's like, how could we do it any other way? You look at companies like Lumi, that I'm a huge fan of, that talks about, the unboxing experience and how right. You want to create that packaging to have an experience. And it could come across as if they're a logistics company helping people with packaging. But in my view, I actually think about them as a retention company, helping people with one more touch point where a brand experience is happening. And so when you have a company whose underlying ethos is like, how do we use every single touch point, including shipping, including unboxing, including customer service, including anything else, as one additional touch point where we're kind of evangelizing our brand and winning these people over as brand advocates, then in that sort of a strategy, it's like, how on earth could we do annoying, repetitive retargeting that just bugs everyone? It's just, to the example of table stakes, it just becomes like the way it has to be. And so then people start to get a lot more motivated about, okay, well, how do we make this work? How do we make the math work? We know that we can't just light money on fire. How are the economics of it all going to work? And from our perspective, we've been talking about this stuff, like I said, for the last 4 years, and we've just seen a huge shift, I'd say, in the last 8 months with how seriously brands are starting to take stuff like this, that I'm very confident about the macro conversations that the industry is having to find the answer to things like, how do we measure the impact of LTV in single decisions, because like things like lifetime value and lift on repeat purchase, it's very hard to quantify those things with really rapid feedback loops, right? I think that's why
Right. And that's the problem.
Yeah, and the drug of performance marketing has been so addictive because it's like insanely rapid feedback loops and highly quantifiable, and so that just makes it very, very easy to make decisions. And so I think as an industry, we just need to get a lot better at being able to reduce the feedback loops on things that we think are important, like brand equity, and try to make them a little bit more or a lot more quantifiable. So like, how do you tie the impact of brand equity to lifetime value lift and be able to have really rapid feedback loops to be able to make decisions around that? And we're far away from this. I think we have to find a way as an industry to get closer to that. But I think folks who can sort of see into the future a little bit realize that even though those things aren't fully there yet, that you have like super rapid feedback loops and highly quantifiable metrics against these sort of strategies, there is a gravitational pull towards that being the right direction. And as long as sort of the smart people of the industry are pointing their attention that way, I'm confident that sort of as an ecosystem, we'll find the right answers.
I agree, and I think you phrased it correctly. It's the drug of performance marketing is everybody's gotten used to being able to immediately see the return on spend, and while that has that's great to report on a short term basis, it can actually hurt long term brand growth, right? Long term brand equity building. And also it completely sort of blinds you to the long-term game. So I think I think as CAC is rising, people are becoming more aware of that and thinking more long-term. So I would agree. I think we're moving that way, but it's, to the enlightened marketer, they're going to make that jump much faster than somebody that's going to wait till it's too late and it just becomes table stakes. So what I'd love to do, because I think this is great. And I think this kind of gives everybody sort of that very high level, very theoretical, idea around why you should be doing this and why it's so important. But I think what's so cool about Shoelace is not just this idea, and let's talk a little bit about the actual tool you guys have built. I think it's not just the fact that you can build these retargeting journeys in a way that, because at the end of the day, you can build retargeting journeys in Facebook, right? It's very difficult. It's hard to do. It's hard to measure. It's hard to report. You can't see it visually. And that's what Shoelace allows you to do. But one of the other things that Shoelace does, it actually allows you to do these integrations with existing platforms. You can pull in information that you would not be able to do, or at least not be able to do as easily if you were just working with the native platforms like Facebook itself, right? So being able to integrate with things like Klaviyo and integrate with things like Yotpo, with rewards programs, and tying the messaging that you're already sending to your customers, whether that be through email or whether it be on your site with customer reviews, but now being able to take that exact same information and putting it in front of somebody in the form of an ad that is going to be seen because you're targeting it specifically to that individual. So you can take where reviews just used to be on the site or maybe sending out through email. Now you can show somebody an ad that shows the exact review for a very specific product they might have been viewing, right? So I'd love to talk a little bit about what you see as some of the most powerful implementations of customer journey retargeting with Shoelace, because I think if we can give people some really tangible examples, that'll help clear things up a bit.
Yeah, totally. So the best way to think about Shoelace is a sort of mix between a technology platform and kind of baked in expertise through the retargeting experts that work at Shoelace. So depending on the kind of plan folks are on, they'll have some amount of dedicated attention from an account manager here who helps with like creation of those initial journeys. The way I usually talk about it is that Shoelace takes out the guesswork and the grunt work in creating retargeting journeys. And over time, the idea is to create a pure kind of technology product that anybody can use to just set up their own journeys. But at the moment, because we're so early in the kind of maturation of retargeting journeys, our view is to have the experience be a lot more fully integrated, such that kind of we're helping people take the guesswork out. Because a lot of people come to us and they're like, I'm not even fully sure exactly what's the right way to create these retargeting journeys. So there's a lot of value in the kind of setup and the hand holding to make sure that everybody's off to the right start. And that's sort of very much baked into the experience of Shoelace. But kind of tactically, the way that we think about it and what the product helps with a lot is to visualize the journey. And so, like you mentioned, it's hard to set those up in Facebook, but it's also very hard to visualize them. And so, a big part of Shoelace is to have this visual element where you're able to kind of just look at the funnel and be like, okay, when people are going through this stage and when these many days go by, I'm able to just like visually digest the journey that people are going through. And that's been really valuable for folks. And the way we think about it is that, going from stage to stage. So, at the high end, we don't do anything with prospecting to kind of help attract new visitors, but the journey for us begins once a visitor has expressed some amount of interest with a brand. So that could be interacting with their Instagram page or the Facebook page, but they've never even been to the site. And so that could be the first stage of the journey, where the idea is to take these people that have kind of interacted with us on social. How do we drive them to the site to kind of maybe look at a few products or look at a few pieces of content? And so you see the journey in Shoelace sort of segmented off within stage of the funnel. So it could be that social engagement stage to then folks who have maybe expressed some interest where they've been to the site, but they've not looked at any collections or they've not looked at any products. And then so that stage will have their own series of campaigns based on the number of days that go by. Because another thing with retargeting is recency plays a really big role to kind of return on ad spend multiples. So when you segment visitors from day 1 to 3, and then day 4 to 7, and then day 7 to 14, in each of those various buckets, you're going to have like day 1 to 13 will always have the highest return on ad spend multiples, and then it'll just kind of decline throughout. And so thinking about, based on how big the audience is, how granular should we get? Should it be day 1 to 3? Should it be day 1 to 7? And the platform kind of helps make those decisions easy based on what we see working with other brands of a similar size. And so the whole idea is that, you have the journey element that is, if a brand maybe has 500,000 visitors per month or more, like there could actually be 50 or 60 different touch points. Not that every one person will have 60 touch points, but like 60 different possible touch points that somebody could go through based on where they were on the site. And it just like helps really visualize what people go through. And then the other point you mentioned is around like integrating into the rest of we call basically like the retention stack. So our view at a methodology level, so this is the thing about Shoelace. We care a lot more about the methodology stuff, and we're trying to get that right. And then and then kind of build a product and business and services around that methodology. And so when we think about the methodology of where paid marketing fits in this era of like retention first e-commerce, is that it needs to be paid marketing needs to be very well informed with the rest of the marketing channels for retention. So email, loyalty, reviews, subscription. Everything that a brand is doing for retention across these other channels, paid marketing can play an amplification role in these. So let's take email as an example. Our Klaviyo integration is kind of a lot of our customers really love that integration, because you're able to set up a trigger in Shoelace that when you send out an email through Klaviyo, you're able to set up some triggers to say, if the open rate is over X or the click-through rate is over Y, let's pull the recipient list of that email, and let's pull the content and the copy and the creator from that email. And then Shoelace automatically creates a retargeting ad that is sent over to the marketer for a quick approval, to be able to just like very quickly create this multi-channel approach for, let's say, whoever didn't open the email or something like that, to be able to make sure that we have that consistent messaging. Or, we invest all of this time and energy in building out a loyalty program, let's say with Smile.io, who's one of our integration partners. And, brands who've invested all this energy into building out their loyalty program, they're able to integrate their loyalty program with Shoelace to say, let's look at somebody, for example, once they have enough points to redeem a reward with us, let's create a trigger that will send out a retargeting ad for a couple of days that encourages them like, hey, congrats, you have enough points to redeem a reward with us, come back and buy something. Or people who maybe visited the site and aren't ready to buy yet, maybe they'll see an ad that goes like, hey, if you join our rewards program, you can get XYZ benefit just by signing up. And so, you can bring people into the funnel without necessarily driving them to purchase, but you can drive them into your loyalty program, let's say. And so we try to think about what is the ideal scenario of this kind of sequential storytelling, retargeting journey that is highly performant and tells a brand story that is fully integrated into the retention stack. How do we create a product that helps customers implement this methodology very easily? And so every sort of product decision we've made in terms of making these things available supports the kind of methodology that we're trying to evangelize, is to say, hey, paid marketing at the middle of the funnel and beyond actually has a way more critical role to play than we've all given it credit for. And it's not just about smashing people with the same ads over and over again. It can actually be a really core part of our retention stack. And that's that's kind of what we've been setting out to build with Shoelace.
And I love both of those two examples a ton for a couple of reasons. But when you look at the Klaviyo integration, right, this idea that, even if you've highly segmented your list, and let's say it's the segmentation that are people that are very close to buying, they've engaged in the last 30 days, whatever it may be, even with a really strong open rate of, say, even between 30 to 40% for that segmentation, that email that went out, that's still a massive amount of people that have been engaged with your brand that did not get that message. So being able to automatically pull that creative that we know resonated well, right? So the copy that we know got a strong open rate, and then being able to put some ad spend behind that to amplify that message and drive more sales back to the site through advertising, I think is incredibly powerful. The other thing with the Shoelace or the Smile integration, we see this all the time with brands that try to implement rewards programs, is that while rewards programs are incredible for retention, it tends to take a bit of traction to get them really up and running because people forget they're there. Or brands will implement a rewards program through something like Smile and then just not really do anything with it. They don't promote it. They don't really they don't ingrain it into the rest of their marketing messaging that they're sending out. And so what I love about this integration with Shoelace is now that it's you can amplify and really get people stuck in and make that rewards program sticky by putting paid ad spend behind it to remind people that, hey, guess what? You've got points to redeem for a free product or for a discount off your product. Come use those points. So I think the way that you guys are thinking about this as an amplification tool, being able to use retargeting as a way to amplify the things that you're already doing that work and being able to do them at a much more effective level, I think is really, really smart. So that's something that I would highly encourage folks that are looking at boosting retention as a way to boost not just sales, but also profits, looking at something like Shoelace or looking at Shoelace as a way to do and amplify what's already working for you.
Totally. Yeah. The way I've always thought about this is that, at the end of the day, when we talk about these things to customers and merchants and brands, never do we see any pushback with somebody being like, that's a bad idea, or I don't think these are good things for me to do. But often what happens is there's so much work involved in doing these kind of granular campaigns that, and in a world where everybody has like a huge to-do list, it sort of never gets it never makes it up high enough on the to-do list. And so what we've been trying to do is, if we can chip away at all the grunt work required to do this work. So like, how do people decide what goes on their priority list, right? It's like, what is the impact of this and how much time and effort is it going to cost? And so I think I don't think anybody has a doubt in terms of the impact of these initiatives, that they're valuable and they should be done. But if we can chip away at the cost of it in terms of how mundane it is to get up, how much grunt work there is to kind of actually set these things up, then it makes that computation a lot simpler. It's like, now all of a sudden it makes sense to do this because it's not that difficult to do. It's not that cumbersome to do. And so that's sort of our view of the world is, let's help people make these decisions a lot easier to be able to incorporate stuff like this into their marketing mix. And often, again, you talk to any marketer, their eyes kind of light up with stuff like this, right? It's like, it's fun. It's creative work to be able to make our entire kind of marketing experiences synchronized. Like, everybody wants this, but when push comes to shove and it's like, we have to go back to work on Monday and it's like, there's so much stuff to do. It's hard to ever prioritize these things. So we want to help make it so easy and so seamless to actually take action on these kind of these kinds of campaigns, to be able to make it so that more and more people can adopt them, so that overall kind of marketers have a more healthy, sustainable, long-lasting approach to their marketing initiatives that is considerate about the brand experience that customers are going through, mindful about how this integrates into other marketing initiatives that they're doing in different channels, and then ultimately drives the kind of return on ad spend numbers that they're able to go back and report to the rest of their team or their board or whoever else, and really move the needle for the company, both from like short-term perspective in terms of return on ad spend figures, which I actually don't think they need to be compromised. So it's not like people need to stop thinking about performance. I think performance is great. We should continue to obsess about it, but we should harness its powers in such a way that it also allows us to kind of invest in these longer term initiatives, so that we're kind of getting the best of both worlds from a near term perspective as well as long term.
I couldn't agree more. And I think what people will find too is that as they invest in that, it's actually going to improve the performance over time. Right.
Totally.
So it's not going to be might not be an immediate short-term boost. Over the long term, it's absolutely going to help. As you increase that brand equity and building up brand equity of your customer base, it's going to improve conversions. It's going to improve return on ad spend for your actual performance-based campaigns. Sending to an audience of people that already love what you do is always going to be more effective than sending that same ad to a cold audience, right? So I think the value is clear. And I'd encourage everybody to sort of look at what you're doing on the retargeting side and see if you have an opportunity to do this. And Reza, from the Shoelace side, what would you recommend for folks as sort of like a first step that are interested in, having their, taking a look at their retargeting ads, doing something different, maybe looking at Shoelace as an option? What would you suggest is sort of the next best step?
So I would say a couple of things. One is, for all the folks out there who are kind of paid marketing agencies, one message to those folks is that we come in peace. I think often, folks who are, performance marketing consultants or firms often wonder, is Shoelace compatible? Are you trying to take work away from me, et cetera? But we actually work very well with agencies as more of a kind of executional partner to help implement a lot of these granular campaigns. So for folks who are listening and wondering, is Shoelace only for brands, or are we in conflict with agencies? The answer is absolutely not. Please reach out and talk to us about how we can actually work with a lot of synergy with agency partners, and you'd be surprised how helpful we can be there. And in general, whether it's kind of somebody at a brand or an agency or anywhere else, always the best step, I would say, is to kind of book a demo, because what we do is relatively new, and the approach to the product isn't just kind of log into the tool and just like go crazy, create your campaigns. The best way to get the experience, just kind of book a demo with somebody on our team that we can walk you through a couple of the journeys that some of our best clients are running. If nothing else, it'll be like a source of inspiration of what others are doing that's working really well for them. And then when there's a fit, there's always an opportunity for someone on our team to kind of do an analysis on what the current retargeting setup is and make some suggestions around how we would do things differently from a journey perspective. And then kind of if there's alignment on that, folks can kind of use our product. But that said, we do have a way to kind of the quick and dirty way to get set up with Shoelace is if you don't want any other kind of journey stuff and you just want the integrations like the Smile integration or the Klaviyo integration. We have like a specific pricing tier for that where you can just kind of get access to that if that's your wish. But I think we've never had somebody kind of book a demo and get a walkthrough of the product and a bunch of the journeys that we run that hasn't kind of walked out of that with at least some inspiration around if they were going to continue to do it themselves, some new ideas around how they would approach it. So feel free to book some time with us. Folks like to say that we're super Canadian and super nice. We're based in Toronto, so you won't be met with like an aggressive you have to use our product now. We are very motivated by evangelizing this concept and advocating for if the entire industry switches from like annoying product-based, smashing people with the same ads over and over again, and more people do this approach to retargeting that we evangelize, we'd be very happy with that outcome. And so, yeah, you can think about booking a demo call with us as a learning opportunity. And we want to try to do more stuff like kind of webinars and things like that to give people some exposure into like how the journeys work and stuff like that. But the easiest way, just go to shoelace.com, grab some time for a demo, and see what all the fuss is about.
Awesome. And I can attest to the friendly Canadians up in the Shoelace office. I've been up there. Reza, this was awesome. I think we've left folks with a bunch of things to think about in terms of how they're running their current retargeting ads and ways that they can improve that experience to better build brand equity with their customer base. This was really helpful. I know we're also going to be working with you guys to put together some more content around this so that people can see some examples and put together an article to walk through all this. So kind of keep an eye out for more on this topic, because I think this is something that, kind of like we've been talking about today, is going to very quickly become table stakes. And all of you out there need to be thinking about how to better push people through and nudge people through your customer journeys, and paid marketing through retargeting is a great way to be doing that. So Reza, thanks for coming on the show today, man. This was a great conversation. So it was great to have you.
Yeah, it was awesome. I had a lot of fun. Thanks again for having me.
Absolutely.
Hey crew, it's Alan Bird again. And real quick before you go, would you like a weekly digest of what's working today in the world of consumer-facing e-commerce? Every week, our team of strategists compile a single email with growth strategies and operations tactics that help you stay ahead of the curve and ahead of the competition. Think of it as the brand operator's cheat sheet. Just head over to thecommercelab.com to sign up.